The stage of Ireland's Got Talent shimmered under 1,000 lights as a quiet young man stepped forward, his footsteps hesitant, almost afraid to echo. His name was Marco Della Peña, a 20-year-old from T. Padilla, Cebu City, and everything about him, his thin frame, his faded blue shirt, his patched-up jeans, spoke of a life shaped by struggle. When he looked toward the judges, his eyes did not show fear, instead they showed a lifetime of carrying burdens too heavy for someone his age. The crowd whispered softly, noticing how he kept rubbing his hands together, perhaps trying to calm the nervous tremble that refused to stop. The host announced his name, but even that sounded distant to Marco as he breathed deeply, preparing to tell a story the world had never heard from him. Aiden, Clara, and Roseanne watched with an intensity that filled the room. Aiden leaned back, trying to read the young man's expressions. Clara pressed her lips together with the soft sympathy that comes only from someone who has witnessed many broken dreams. Roseanne tilted her head slightly, her eyes already warm with emotional readiness. Marco stepped closer to the microphone and started speaking, his voice fragile like it might break at any moment. He introduced himself, talked about growing up poor in Cebu, about living in a crowded alley where the roofs leaked during storms and food was often not enough for everyone. He mentioned his mother working 2 jobs and his younger siblings sharing 1 pair of school shoes. His words weren't delivered for pity, they came out naturally, simply describing a life he had known forever. When the music finally began, the entire theater seemed to inhale at once. Marco closed his eyes and released his first note, a note so pure and trembling that it felt like it came from the deepest part of him. His voice carried the pain of sleepless nights, the hope of a boy who had once sung on street corners for coins, and the silent promise he made to his family that he would someday find a way out. The audience stopped moving, even the camera operators froze, drawn into the sound pouring out of him. Aiden shifted forward, stunned by the unexpected power behind such a gentle presence. Clara's breath caught as she watched him push through a high note with a force that brought tears instantly to her eyes. Roseanne covered her heart with her hand, shaking her head at how real and raw the performance felt. As Marco reached the emotional peak of the song, his voice cracked, not from mistake, but from sincerity, and the crowd erupted in emotional gasps. By the time he finished, his final note trembling into silence, the entire auditorium was on its feet. People clapped through tears, some shouting, "Bravo!" while others simply cried, unable to say anything at all. Marco dropped his gaze, overwhelmed, fighting his own tears. Clara stood first, visibly emotional, her voice breaking as she told him he carried the heart of his people in every note he sang. And without waiting a second longer, she slammed the golden buzzer, sending a shower of gold confetti cascading around Marco like a miracle falling from the sky. He covered his face with his hands, dropped to his knees, and cried, not from sadness, but from the feeling that his entire life had finally changed forever. Backstage, the world felt different for Marco Della Peña. The golden confetti still clung to his hair, his clothes, even the palms of his shaking hands. Every breath he took felt heavy with disbelief. Just minutes earlier, he had been a poor boy from T. Padilla, Cebu City, standing in front of a massive stage, hoping the world would hear him. Now, he was the golden buzzer act of Ireland's Got Talent, and the echo of the audience's roaring applause still rang in his ears like a heartbeat he could not quiet. The host rushed toward him with open arms, pulling him into a tight, emotional hug. Marco trembled hard, unable to speak, his chest rising and falling with silent sobs that he tried to hide but couldn't control. "You did it, Marco. You did it," the host said over and over again, almost shouting with excitement. Marco pulled back, wiping tears from his cheeks, shaking his head in disbelief. I can't believe it," he whispered, his voice cracking from the overwhelming storm of emotions inside him. The cameras followed him closely, capturing every tear, every gasp, every trembling smile. Crew members stood around watching, their own eyes shining. One of the makeup artists covered her mouth as she cried quietly, whispering something about how his voice reminded her of her childhood. As Marco tried to steady himself, one of the assistants handed him a phone. "You should call your family," she said softly, her voice warm with genuine kindness. Marco nodded as if waking from a dream and dialed his mother's number with shaking fingers. The moment she answered, his voice broke again. "Ma," he whispered, The sound of his mother crying echoed through the phone before she could even form a sentence. "Marco, Anik, are those cheers for you?" she asked through sobs. Marco turned the screen to show her the confetti, the stage glowing behind him, the people still cheering far away. His mother cried harder, placing her hand over her mouth, unable to control her emotions. His younger siblings crowded around the phone, their faces bright with excitement and pride. The judges stepped backstage for a brief moment before the next act. Clara walked straight toward Marco, her eyes still red. She placed her hands on his shoulders gently, as though afraid he might break from the weight of the moment. "Marco," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you did more than perform. You reminded us why this show exists." Aiden nodded, telling Marco that courage like his is rare and that his voice carried the truth of 1,000 stories. Roseanne held his hand and told him she had never cried so deeply from a performance. Their tears reflected his own, creating a moment where stage, judges, and contestant felt like one beating heart. As they walked away to prepare for the next act, Marco stayed still, clutching his chest and looking upward with a gratitude so deep it almost hurt. The air backstage smelled of confetti, sweat, and something else, hope. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that his life, and the lives of his family in Cebu, were beginning to change in ways he never imagined possible. The semi-final night of Ireland's Got Talent arrived with a kind of electric tension that Marco Della Peña had never experienced before. The arena was larger, the lights brighter, and the crowd louder than anything from his first audition. Yet, behind all the noise, Marco remained the same humble boy from T. Padilla, Cebu City, standing quietly backstage in his slightly oversized white shirt and borrowed black pants. His hands trembled as he held the microphone, but his eyes showed a strength that had grown from the golden buzzer moment. He whispered a silent prayer for his mother, his siblings, and every poor kid back home who believed that dreams were only for the rich. Tonight, he wanted to prove otherwise. When the stage manager called his name, Marco stepped out into the vastness of the arena, the floor glowing beneath him. The audience erupted instantly, recognizing the young Filipino whose voice had moved the nation. Even the judges smiled in anticipation. Aiden with his arms crossed but a softness in his eyes, Clara already leaning forward with the tenderness of someone ready to feel deeply again, and Roseanne clasping her hands together excitedly. The host introduced Marco as the voice that touched every heart in this theater, and the crowd cheered even louder, making Marco inhale sharply with emotion. The lights dimmed, leaving only a soft, golden circle around him. The music began, this time a powerful, emotional blend of modern melody and traditional Filipino undertones. Marco chose the song deliberately, wanting Ireland to hear the sound of his homeland through every rise and fall in his voice. He closed his eyes and began to sing. The first note floated into the air like a prayer carried by the wind, fragile yet filled with undeniable strength. Each lyric was shaped by memories of Cebu's crowded streets, by nights when he sang to distract himself from hunger, by moments when he wondered if dreams were meant for people like him. As he built toward the chorus, Marco's voice expanded, no longer trembling, rising with confidence and heartbreak woven together. The audience leaned in, every eye on him. Clara's eyes filled instantly with tears, her chest rising with each emotional wave. Aiden blinked quickly, trying to keep composure but losing the battle as a tear escaped. Roseanne openly cried, whispering, "Oh my God," as the power of Marco's voice poured across the room. When he hit the high note, long, clean, and breathtaking, the entire arena erupted with gasps. Some stood without even realizing it. Others cried quietly. Many held their hands to their hearts. Marco's voice didn't just sing. It reached into people, pulled at the scars they thought they'd hidden, and reminded them of their own battles. As the last note faded into silence, a heaviness lingered in the air, followed by an explosion of applause. People rose from their seats instantly, shouting his name. Aiden wiped tears openly now, shaking his head in disbelief. "Marco, you're not just a singer," he said, voice breaking. "You're a reminder that greatness can rise from anywhere." Clara added that his performance felt like standing in front of pure truth, and Roseanne told him his voice reshaped the entire night. Marco covered his mouth, overwhelmed, as the audience chanted his name over and over again. In that moment, under the blinding lights and echoing cheers, He realized he was no longer just a poor boy from Cebu, he was a voice heard by the world.